The following presentation is brought to you through the power of science.
Ooh, shiny.
Welcome to Generations Geek, a more or less family-friendly celebration of all that is geeky. I'm science fiction writer Scott Pearson, and along with my daughter,
Hello.
we are two generations of geek.
This is episode 42. The ape is back in town. That's right, King Kong is back and bigger than ever, and we'll talk about how he measures up to previous versions and how well we think he fits into the new shared Kaiju universe with Godzilla.
But first, you can find handy links to all our episodes, like episode 7, wherein we discussed the 1933, 1976, and 2005 versions of King Kong, at generationsgeek.com.
Now, on with the show.
Okay, here we are, 2017, just 12 years after the previous version of King Kong.
I didn't realize how long ago that was.
See,
and
to
how
me,
old I am.
that seems like not long ago, but as far as rebooting goes, but I can understand how it seems like more to you.
Well, because I remember, like, being too little to go see it with you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I remember you going out to the premiere and me being like, I have to stay home. Like,
So, the 1933 movie was set in, basically 1933.
Mhm.
And then there was the 1976 version, which
Yeah.
was set in 1976.
Big surprise.
Then the 2005 version went back and was set in the 30s.
Yeah.
And now we have the 2017 version, which takes place primarily in the 70s, although it has a fabulous prologue sequence.
Yeah.
The messing around with the time periods is nice. I mean, I think it's...
that choice for Vietnam was so interesting and so well done, I think, and really lent itself to the story that they wrote, I feel like.
Yeah, well, I think it was a good decision on their part to modernize the film, and then it was interesting that they didn't take it all the way to the contemporary times. And of course, this relates to the shared Kaiju universe that they're developing, because this is in the same universe as Godzilla.
Well, and then also just taking it to Vietnam as opposed to World War II as opposed to World War One. I felt like Vietnam was much more of almost a contained conflict, and World War One and World War II were world wars.
Well, and they needed to fit it nicely into the Godzilla universe. And so having the World War II prologue, even though it has nothing to do plot-wise with Godzilla, puts it into that time period where the Godzilla film
Especially
took place.
Later in the movie when you start to figure out.
And then flashing it forward to the 1970s gets it more contemporary, but then gives some room in between that and when Godzilla takes place. And so that's kind of interesting how they're dovetailing the films together, because then there's going to be another Godzilla movie, but then there's going to be a Godzilla versus King Kong movie. And so we now know that there's going to be this time in between them. And there's a line in the film where the World War II character who's been living on the island says something about Kong hasn't stopped growing yet.
Yeah.
So
that was so good.
Yeah,
because
so
I was like, he's small.
Yeah, so he's got another 30 years of growth before he meets up with Godzilla. All this stuff,
baby,
ties in. Let's talk a little bit about the growth of Kong through the years. So in the first film, he was a pretty big guy.
Yeah. But he's not.
Then in the second film, they made him much bigger.
Yeah.
Then in Peter Jackson's film, they kind of dialed it back a little bit, I think, maybe compared to 1976.
Oh, maybe.
But now with this one, since he's eventually got to face up against Godzilla and other kaiju, then they really ramped him up, and now he's like twice as big as he ever was.
Really?
Or more, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I actually got the impression that he was maybe a little small.
Compared to what?
I don't know anymore. But maybe I got brainwashed by them being like, oh, he's a baby, and like the shots, or I don't know.
What was your initial gut reaction to the film?
Just the cinematography and visual aspects of it. That was really what hit me first. I don't remember the name of the director who actually directed the film, but the way he reminded me a lot of Edgar Wright, and the way that he cuts those fast action shots where it's like boom and a cut and boom and a cut, just those quick things, especially in the prologue with the pseudo sword fight, and he was cutting quickly, and then he cuts from the blade to one of Kong's hands, and then one of Kong's hands, and then the shot of Kong pulling himself up next to them. It was crazy. But the entire movie kept up such a strong aesthetic, and it was, I mean, like
visually.
It seemed like every shot was just flawless.
It was very well crafted from a visual standpoint.
Yeah.
And from like an action standpoint.
Yeah.
But
within the script and the characters, there was some work that needed to be done. But
yeah,
well, that's part of what I said when you were like initial thoughts, and it was like my only initial thought was like, that's pretty. Like, because there I mean, there were a few really funny scenes and everything, but you know, I love Tom Hiddleston and everything, and so I went in wanting to see his performance, and they didn't really give him anything besides looking pretty and saying some stuff in like a gravelly voice.
Let's talk characters and character development.
Yeah.
Because this is where the movie largely falls flat. And while you're in the theater watching the action, it's easy to get swept up and just enjoy the spectacle.
Yeah.
But, boy, there is just nothing to the characters. Because I found myself reflecting upon Godzilla.
Yeah.
Because in
really
Godzilla, you have the very well developed, you've got the father character who's tortured and spent his life trying to figure out what happened in the horrible tragedy. You've got his semi-estranged son who's been dealing with his kind of crazy dad all his life, who's not there for him because he's off trying to chase monsters or whatever. And then you have the fact that the son now has his own family and is struggling with not being with them because he's in the service. And when things start happening and he's with his father again, then there's a complexity to their relationship that changes and grows as the son starts to realize, wow, my dad isn't crazy.
Yeah.
So there's all this backstory that they work in there. And part of the reason they do that is because, of course, Godzilla isn't on screen as much as, say, Kong is in this one. But there's a richness then to those characters. And there is none of that in Kong Skull Island. Tom Hiddleston, he's just, brooding, mysterious special forces guy. And you know that because he broods at the camera and says, yeah, I was in special forces.
And then he says, let me list all the ways you're going to die.
And then,
and he beats some dudes up playing pool.
And then there's the hardened war photographer because she's seen the action.
Yeah.
But you aren't given any details.
But she's an anti-war photographer.
An anti-war photographer.
Please.
Which that was a fun line.
It was good.
But we don't get a scene like a flashback scene that shows her, in battle, or we don't
photographing the mass graves she talks about.
Yeah, we just get them telling us, because Hiddleston and her, they meet each other, they tell each other about their own characters.
Yeah, that was definitely a shortcut. How in movies, like, they'll have characters will meet each other, like, and immediately tell each other their entire life story and their deepest, darkest secrets right away, and which is never something that happens in real life. Yeah.
So that was disappointing. And then to continue the comparison with Godzilla, the wife of the main character. You get glimpses into her, her struggles as well and what she's doing. And so the father, the son, the wife, there's all sorts of emotional human stuff there that's developed. And almost all the characters in here are very interchangeable. There's a couple things here and there. There was the one soldier who was trying to write a letter home to his son, Billy. Dear Billy. Sort of a running thing through the movie. And that was a little touching. But, and then there was sort of the comedy relief characters. And those were well done. But
it was still just funny soldier guy.
Yeah, so there was...
almost too young, boy soldier, the dude who wears the headband the whole time, and then there's hardened captain who then gets overcome with revenge.
So in many ways there were a lot of elements in Kong Skull Island that were by the numbers and with the kind of stock characters that you're expecting. But for some reason, in spite of that, for me, I found it quite likable and entertaining while I was watching the movie.
It was definitely likable and entertaining.
After you leave and reflect back on it, you kind of
when you think about it, you're like,
there's not much there.
It's like you watch this entire movie and then you think about it and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, but it was a fun spectacle.
I mean, the most character development we got was really from the Crash pilot.
Yeah, the character that veteran character actor John C. Reilly played, who kind of stole the movie, I thought.
Oh, definitely. Sounds like a bird.
And do you remember him? He had kind of a scene-stealing small role in Guardians of the Galaxy. He was like the... He was one of the guards that was looking at the Guardians and going, oh, jeez. You get the most depth from him because... So he's the guy, you get the fun opening prologue in World War II. He and a Japanese fighter pilot, they both crash on this mysterious island. At first, they're keeping up their conflict. They're chasing each other around, trying to kill each other until Kong appears. And they're like, whoa, there are bigger things going on here than us. And that's kind of a fun scene. But to me, they really missed something by then not having at least one flashback scene showing... the two fighter pilots
because
together
that's so touching
during the years, because it is a touching part of the backstory that
because then at first they're enemies and then they're friends and then after and it's all they have is each other really because they're on this island with these natives and then he's just gone. It's so tragic.
And we get everything past the appearance of Kong in the prologue, the fact that they became friends, the fact that they became incredibly close and had this decades-long friendship on the island. We only get that in dialogue from the American character.
Yeah.
And I really would have loved one scene, even just one scene, or montage.
Montage!
The actor is able to portray his, the depth of his feelings for his dead friend later in the film as when he gets ready to leave and he's, sort of essentially has to say goodbye.
That I thought that killed me. And then the scene at the very end when he gets... We're getting way out of order here, but yeah. Okay, but let me tell you something. I was holding back real tears, okay? I wasn't misting up because, this is so one. I was holding back real tears.
Well, and it's interesting that all the truly emotional moments in the film, with the most depth, come from that one character.
Yep, that character.
Who, in many ways, is not really the lead character.
Not at all.
But he was the one that was given the depth. He was the one that was given the story. And, and him facing up to going back to the world after being isolated for 30 years and only just finding out, that we won World War II But yeah, they start playing Vera Lynn singing "We'll Meet Again"
Oh,
from World War II. I'm a sucker for that song. And then when you see him reuniting with his wife and with the
Literally, I can't even talk about it.
the son that he knew. Well, he didn't know he had a son, but he knew that his wife was pregnant, and so he's got a child that he's never seen. That was a very emotionally satisfying arc for that character, and no one else really got an arc.
Although we have to pay them a really big compliment in that they didn't shoehorn in a useless romance.
Yes.
Because I was waiting for the cringy force scene between Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston.
Yes.
And it didn't happen.
No.
What did happen? He runs down to her after she's almost drowned and she throws up all the water on him. Which I think was my it's I wanted to tweet me waiting for the romance scene in King Kong and then getting this and then just me dancing outside the theater.
And she was, with what little she was given, she was developed as a strong female character.
Oh, definitely.
She's a photographer. She's a war photographer. She's,
an anti-war photographer.
She gets out there in the thick of things. She stands up to crazy Samuel L. Jackson.
She gets to the ship to go to the island with them, and one of the scientists turns and sees her and is like, "Is a woman. You're a woman." And she's like, "I think so," and just kind of gets on the ship with all these men. So that's great. Well, because then she also had the very subtle, the blonde woman's relationship with King Kong in every King Kong movie.
But it was subtle.
It was very subtle.
I enjoyed how they did that.
Yeah.
There was enough there that it is like a callback to the classic story, but that wasn't this story,
Yeah.
and so it was more like an illusion. I have to
go back to a criticism, which is sad, but you get this very subtle, I think 2 scenes of them of Brie Larson and then them together, having a touching moment with Kong. But I didn't think it was enough for Captain Conrad to want to step in front of a gun for Kong at the end when Samuel L. Jackson is trying to kill him. They immediately get in front of him this crazy guy who is totally capable of just murdering them both. And I was kind of
Well, yeah. Well, let's step back a little bit to our discussion about characters. And let's talk about the character of Kong himself. Now, Kong has always been, in the traditional story, the sympathetic monster.
Yeah.
I'm doing air quotes.
Yeah.
And this is something that we discussed our previous Kong podcast, that in monster movies, in classic monster movies, like Frankenstein, King Kong, the monster is monstrous in some ways, but eventually it turns, and your sympathies are with the monster, and you are upset with the humans that are behaving badly. Now, the 2005 Kong version really took that and ran with it. In the 2005 King Kong, you spent the most time with Kong, and he was really developed as a character, as much more layered.
When she's dancing, she's doing her vaudeville routine,
and he's amused, and So now in this film, there's a step back from that, and it makes sense. But he's more. I mean, he's developed as a protector. Interestingly, similar to the way Godzilla is developed. But there's not as much of a sense of a character there as there is in the 2005 version.
But I felt like in the previous Kongs, he was so much more brutal. It's always a thing of the natives make sacrifices to him.
Mm-hmm.
And in this movie it was no, he takes care of business.
Oh, and speaking of natives, this was definitely the most sympathetic and respectful depiction of a native population on Skull Island.
You mean like they were real people and not just like creepy murder machines?
Yes. That's one thing that I dislike about Peter Jackson's version. There's a tendency in Western films in general that if you're portraying some sort of native population, especially if
the stereotype of the vicious, violent,
and
people sacrificing native population.
And in this one, they were just like the chill natives. They didn't even speak. They just stood around philosophically.
I do wish they'd had a line, though. It's like they could have given them like a language and had them said like a few words to be like, yeah, it's cool if they stay here, bro. Like,
well, the way I took it was that they were almost like monks. They were just like,
well, yeah, because then he also
subdued.
The World War II pilot has the line about how he's like they're past all that.
Yeah.
Saying like they're more advanced than we are, which is nice as opposed to being like, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, we're leaping all around here because I don't know why. Because that's what we do.
Because the movie was what it is.
It was thinly plotted. But let's go back again. Some of the plot that there was tied in to Godzilla, developing the shared universe. As the movie starts, we have the John Goodman character as a representative of the Monarch group, the secret group that's in charge of tracking giant monsters, which was introduced in Godzilla. He's trying to get funding or something from the government to let him go to this newly discovered island. It's a little confusing because he's being treated like he's a complete crackpot. I mean, Monarch is a secret government organization, but then he's going to like his congressman to get.
Well, it
was a little muddled the way it was developed, I thought, but
it's like in the X-Files where he's like, technically it's an official part of the government, whatever, but nobody likes or cares or respects them.
Yeah. And well, and this was
stick him in the basement.
Yeah, and part of the reason why that worked in this film was when you leap from World War II to the 70s, so now it's been 30 years from the flashback events of Godzilla.
Yeah.
And so enough time has passed that one can infer that Monarch has fallen out of favor, or that more and more all the people that knew what really happened back when they were trying to nuke Godzilla, they've forgotten, they've passed on, they've whatever. And so so Monarch seems to be scrambling to try to convince people what's really going on. So they're able to get together their expedition to the island, and then unfortunately, in the long run, as it turns out, their military escort is commanded by Samuel L. Jackson's character, who is suffering from the disillusionment as a gung-ho military commander guy. He's suffering from the delusionment that he's gotten by the end of the Vietnam War and the United States just having to withdraw without any sort of decisive victory. Yeah. And so he's like looking for a win. And so when they start blowing up charges on the island to map its seismographic, etc.
To quote, map it, blah, 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 science words, end quote.
Then, and they stir up Kong, and Kong attacks and kills a bunch of people, then suddenly the commander goes nutso.
Those little bombs were the worst idea I've ever heard of in my life. Even for somebody who's like trying to stir up a monster, like find a monster, it's like, really? You're gonna start blowing stuff up? Like,
well, they really were also doing seismic stuff, because the other scientist character had his theory about like the hollow earth and openings into thing. So it kind of tied into Obviously, it's not the kind of movie where you're looking for perfect science.
Oh no, the second he was like, we're gonna drop these things and they're gonna blow up, I was like, boy! Ooh, the scene where one of the soldiers is like washing like the blood off of himself and washing his cuts in the water, and then Kong comes and he gets super afraid and hides, but then Kong is doing the same exact thing in the water. Powerful.
That was a
okay?
nice little scene,
And then he gets some calamari. So
the soldier that saw that, you could tell that it affected him.
Yeah, he
was like realizing, wait a minute, this is just this.
Well, it's also confusing when the monster looks almost exactly like you, but with fur. Like,
but yeah, you could see that he was reflecting upon that this wasn't just some sort of killing machine.
Yeah.
That it was a real creature who's hurt and that was well done. I think that they would have been served by having fewer characters. It's like they had this huge number of characters to begin with, just so that there was cannon fodder for Kong to kill a bunch of people and still have enough people left for the movie. And I think they could have done that better, especially because when the helicopters of the expedition start taking off from the ship, maybe I was looking at things wrong, but my perception was like, here's this ship, and it's got 3 or 4 helicopters on it.
Yeah, they show
and
like
3 or 4 helicopters take
helicopters
off.
taking off, and then there's like 16 in the air.
Yeah, and then it cuts to a wide shot.
And then Kong cuts down 24.
And there's a
gabillion. And then 84 people are dead.
Yeah, it's like where there was no room
and then
on that.
Samuel L. Jackson has to kill 840 apes. Yeah.
There was no room on that ship for all those helicopters. They just came out of nowhere. Plus, after Kong wipes out all the helicopters, and they come up with the idea that they have to make their way across the island to
He wipes out the 24 helicopters, and then there's still about 30 in the air.
Well, so that's the thing. There was actually a line. They say, the Hiddleston character says, we have to go across the island to the exfiltration point or whatever fancy army talk. And one of the other characters says, but how are we going to get off? Kong destroyed all the helicopters. And someone says, well, they'll notice we're missing and they'll mount some sort of a rescue mission or something. But then as soon as they get there, there's choppers approaching.
Maybe they sent more choppers.
So that was really messed up. There was some continuity issues there. And I think that what they could have done is if they would have just stuck with having 3 or 4 choppers and Kong destroys 3 of them, maybe only one of them lands successfully, but they wanted to, they had to turn it up to 11, and so it's like, no, we have to show Kong swatting down, because that's the other thing. If you're flying your chopper over a mysterious island and suddenly there's a
oh my god, I know
100-foot tall ape and you see it swat down a couple of choppers, I think maybe you're going to back off beyond arm's reach of the giant ape.
You're going to get out of it. Yeah, you're going to judge the circumference, and you're going to back up, and then you're going to back up some more, and then you're going to fly back to freaking Vietnam, okay?
But it seemed like they just kept buzzing around him within arm's reach.
Like, shooting at him.
And
because it's always like, oh, we must kill this beast immediately. There is no backup so we don't die. There is only kill. It was an unconventional encounter. They did the best they could under the circumstances.
Like a lot of these kind of movies, when you really start reflecting upon things, you start noticing all these little glitches and holes. But it was fun while we were watching it. They had fun creatures. It is fun.
I would definitely see it again.
Fun monsters. Fun and creepy monsters.
Oh my god, the spider.
Fabulous
Murdered
effects. Creepy giant spiders.
I really couldn't deal with that. But also the thing with, that comes back to Kong, 3 helicopters take off and then Kong knocks down 84. The spider has 8 legs and they cut down 64.
I'd have to see it again.
Well,
There was a lot of leg chopping.
It kept cutting to the shot into the trees where you could see the traditional spider body with 8 clear legs, and then it would cut back to them being like, cut the legs! And then immediately at once, like, every one of them, like, chopped one down, and I was like, shouldn't she be falling down by now? You know? It's like, But it was still cool and creepy. Ooh, the gigantic stick insect.
Oh, that was fun.
And, like, cute.
Yes.
And then you realize that...
And it just lumbered away as soon as it could.
Mm-hmm.
And so not everything is death, kill machine on Skull Island.
But also, you know, it basically
like the water buffalo, too.
Oh my god, the water buffalo.
That was a great bit.
Sometimes it's just too good. Just punch me in the face if I could go hang out with a water buffalo of that size.
Yeah, the size of a stadium.
That spends its life in the water. Like, literally, I can't.
So we've hit on a lot of the high points and low points of the movie. High points being action and just pure visual spectacle. Low points being the almost complete absence of character development and some of the cardboard characters. Here,
you can't cast Tom Hiddleston and then not give him anything.
They really
because
didn't.
I'll come for you.
They did not take advantage of his star power at all. Well, no,
like
they took advantage of his star power. They didn't take advantage of his acting
abilities. And then they
abilities.
were like, bulk up. And then they were just like, okay, now stand there and look like you're about to break your shirt sleeves. And that was like his job.
Yeah, and who is he? It's like, I have no sense of who that guy is.
Captain Conrad.
It's like, yeah, he's Captain Conrad, SAS. I've done mysterious things. And it's like, okay.
I'm just hanging out in Vietnam, beating up guys, playing pool for some reason. Or was it in Vietnam? Yeah, he was in Vietnam for like no reason. He was just, Captain Conrad goes where the action is.
We should point out that Captain Conrad is a clear allusion to the author Joseph Conrad, who was the author of Heart of Darkness.
You lost me.
So there's a classic novel, Heart of Darkness, that was adapted into a little film by the name of Apocalypse Now, a classic Vietnam film, although the original novel was not in Vietnam. And it's about a guy who, an army officer that goes crazy, and someone has to go and take care of him. And there's a travel on a boat on a river through the jungles.
But Captain Conrad didn't go crazy. Samuel L. Jackson went crazy.
No, well, yeah, but Conrad was the name of the author of the original novel. And so then this is a Vietnam movie. It's got a crazy military officer in it. It does have some travel on a boat, on a river. There's all these elements and motifs that they were playing with that didn't really pay off in any sort of deep dramatic sense as they might have. And in some cases, I think just it was a little bit easy to just, do the slow-mo helicopter shots and the silhouetted helicopters. And
my favorite elements and motifs are Brie Larson shooting a flare into a skull crawler's eye and Tom Hiddleston doing anything.
So they were making these illusions for a sense of depth, perhaps, that they didn't really earn. And maybe that's unfair, because really you have to go into this just looking to see a big old monster action movie, and that's really all it is. But another fun element of it was, speaking of the boat, the boat
was fun.
That the World War II veterans had built over the years, cobbling together parts of their planes and other planes that had crashed there. So it's got like big dual 50 caliber guns from a B-17 or something, and then but you can see pieces of his plane, and that was a fun touch. And again, so there you see one of the most entertaining aspects again comes back to the John C. Reilly World War II character, and not any of the actual alleged main characters.
I don't think it passes the Bechdel test.
Well, the Bechdel test generally refers to if the female characters only talk about men. That wasn't in here. There wasn't a scene where they were... How are you defining the Bechdel test?
Woman or women in a scene without men talking about something that doesn't involve the men.
Yeah, I don't think we got a scene with the two of them together in any significant sense. But, as mentioned earlier, there is not the forced romance between
There's not the forced romance. Both of the women stand up for themselves and their
and don't say anything
specialities.
And don't say anything about their relationships in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it passes the Bechdel test, but that is not to say that it did what it could have done with the female characters.
I'll give it like a C. Like solid pass, but Hollywood.
Yeah.
Let's get going.
It was better than a lot of Hollywood movies, but yeah, I could have used more. I mean, just as I could have used more with any of the characters. You know, there just wasn't character development.
Right. There really wasn't. Well, that's the other part, is that there really wasn't any. It's not like they developed the male characters and didn't develop the female characters, but
yeah, they were almost all equally undeveloped, except for some exceptions here and there. You know, the little backstory about Dear Billy. You know, just some snippets.
Dear Billy, let's start trying to pass the Bechdel test with a solid B+.
So, Samuel L. Jackson. So he goes revenge crazy, which you can understand to a certain extent. But,
to a certain extent.
But it got ridiculous because it was so obvious the task before him was unachievable because Kong is just so big. And they had so little. You know, you kind of have to take it with the Heart of Darkness concept a little bit and tie it in with how he was feeling about the end of the war, and he wants a win. He just wants a win.
Well, and also I got the sense that he's the type of character who, like, he doesn't really have anything outside of the army.
Yeah.
And so for the war to end, so I don't know, with them just sort of giving up, and then also like he had built like a family.
Yeah, he, you know, it's understandable how a man in his position would be disillusioned by the end of the war. And, you know, in my former day job, I worked on a lot of military history books and dealt with a variety of Vietnam veterans of various ranks. And so I know that because of the way the war played out, that there are a lot of complicated feelings that some of these guys have carried around with them.
To have to go through what so many of them did and then have to, you know, just leave.
Yeah.
Without a sense of victory.
Yeah, because for...
Or even a sense of loss, you know? It was just over.
For various reasons, because of the growing peace movement, of course, a lot of these guys felt rejected by their fellow Americans, and they felt, you know, and then there was the just withdrawing and the ending of the war without any clear victory and the feeling of loss. And so it's understandable that, you know, there's a lot of mixed feelings and bad feelings about the situation. But, you know, then another sort of tired trope of cinema is the crazed Vietnam veteran. And,
is it?
And this, yes, and it's, well...
I had no idea. But I also, watching this movie, I realized...
Because of your age,
yeah.
you haven't experienced the kind of movies that came out in a certain time period where there were lots of...
I haven't seen very many war movies.
Yeah.
Well, and then another thing is that apparently I learned nothing from my 11th grade history course because I don't remember learning anything about Vietnam. And then I got told that we spent half the year learning about Vietnam, and I have zero memory of it.
Well,
none. I felt uneducated.
Not that one really needs to understand all the socio-political ramifications of Vietnam War to go see
No.
Skong Island, I was about to say.
Skull!
Skull Island. Where King Kong was a VC sympathizer. That's a... if you were 20 years older, you might have found that funny. Maybe.
Does VC stand for Viet Cong?
Yes.
Nailed it.
So...
Shout out to my 11th grade history teacher, Matt.
So, long
Here's
story
my problem.
short, I have mixed feelings about what they did with Samuel L. Jackson's character and his relation and his adversarial relationship with King Kong. You know, and which they kind of overdid. You know, there's like this bit where there's a shot on Kong as he's getting ready to fight, and he kind of makes his hands into fists, and then there's a shot later.
Meme?
Then there's a shot later where Samuel Jackson's hands do the same
lots
thing,
of hands,
and then there's a
fist
close-on shot
clenching.
of Kong's eyes and a close-on shot of Jackson's eyes, and that was, you know, over the top. But
Here's my problem. I feel nothing except for an overwhelming unnamed emotion because of the last scene where the World War II veteran comes home. That's what we always have to come back to. Because it takes a lot for me to have to hold back real tears in a theater. I can't remember. I think the last time I was holding back real tears is watching the Battle of Five Armies and thinking Peter Jackson has killed everything I love. And I'll never see it in a movie theater again.
in our crazed and rambling discussion,
It was kind of a crazed and rambling movie. I don't know, dude.
is there anything...
It kind of just snowballed. It wasn't very organized, you know?
Well, in some ways, I think you could make the argument that it was organized because it hit all the same beats that, like, Godzilla did. In some ways, it was kind of like... It was almost like they took Godzilla as a template, and you know, John Goodman was the analog for the character of the father. It's like you need the guy that's like thought to be crazy but is chasing after the monsters, and you know, and so
Godzilla was so much more complicated, though.
But yeah, that's, you know, the characters were more developed.
And in the beginning, when you're rooting against Godzilla because he's destroying everything, and then the rising feeling of him having come to protect
and
from
that's
the kaijus.
and that's the other element of that. King Kong seems like this sort of pale copy of Godzilla, because then in this movie Kong is a protector and protects the indigenous population against the other monsters. And so in some ways it was like, oh, this seems like they're kind of retreading, but in other ways it's kind of interesting, because since we already know that there's going to be a Godzilla versus King Kong, it's kind of interesting because you're wondering, okay, well, what's going to bring them at odds?
Godzilla versus King Kong, but then the Demogorgon comes and they have to settle their differences.
So let's talk a little bit about the after credit scene. Because we are smart, movie-going, geek Marvel followers, we know that you do not walk out of the theater.
Especially when it's like a new...
Because
this
you
is the
never
start
know.
of a new thing, and you don't know if they're going to do the Marvel thing
You
or if
never
they're not
know.
going to do the Marvel thing.
Yeah. And in this one, it was tricky because it wasn't a mid-credit sequence. It was a completely at the end. And I found myself confused for a while because even before Marvel, I'm a credit watcher. I like to stay through the credits. I don't try to read them all word for word, because often with special effects films, there's too many names to even try to read all the credits. But I like to just witness. Here are the people that have made this piece of art.
Yeah.
But I look at things here and there, and as I was watching the credits, I noticed in the credits that it said Rodan, Mothra, and Ghidorah, copyright, blah, 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 Toho Pictures or whatever. And I was like, well, that's weird. Why did they just...
I saw that too.
Why did they acknowledge the copyright of 3 monsters that were not in this movie? Well, the answer soon came to be, because then suddenly the post-credit sequence started, and it was both fun and confusing, because on the fun level, it was just another tie-in with Monarch, tying in to Godzilla, and really helping to cement that this is a shared world. And Pretty Boy Hiddleston and Brie Larson are being questioned about what they saw on the island, and they're being warned that it's got to be kept secret. And
honestly, they spent more time on Tom Hiddleston's hair than than Brie Larson's hair.
I think they did. And
not that I'm mad, but
yeah. And then here's where it gets confusing, though. But then the 2 other minor scientist characters come in.
Yeah.
Now, yes, they survived.
The quote, geologists, unquote.
Yeah, and they suddenly both seem much more in the know and powerful than what you ever thought throughout. And so it's like, okay, are we supposed to infer that they were kind of playing the John Goodman character a little bit, and they were higher up in Monarch, or that they were in cahoots more with the government, or what? I don't know, because suddenly they seem very commanding. But then they come out and we get another sort of exposition dump, but it worked well in the context. They start showing some like cave paintings that were discovered, and one of them clearly shows a silhouette of Godzilla. And then we see the silhouettes of the other 3 monsters.
Mothra, Rodan, and me struggling.
Ghidorah. I think that's called...
Ghidorah the Explorer.
I've never actually... I don't think I ever saw any of the movies, the Godzilla movies that Ghidorah was in, so I always stumble over the name. I'm not as familiar with it. And we get more sort of backstory about the world and the seismic thing and the hollow earth and the blah, blah, blah. But it really sets up, I guess it's safe to assume that in Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters, or whatever the subtitle's going to be, that he's probably going to be fighting some of those
Godzilla
monsters.
2,
Electric
Demogorgon
Boogaloo,
returns.
the Demogorgon. This time it's personal.
Millie Bobby Brown is going to be in that movie.
And, oh, that's right. Yeah, she's going to be in Godzilla 2. And then we've got the long wait to King Kong versus Godzilla. But I think it's going to have to be that somehow they get set at odds with each other for a little bit, but then don't you think some bigger problem's going to arise, and then they're going to have to team up and fight something else together?
Honestly, the only thought in my head right now is Mothra, Rodan, Ghidorah, and then me just screaming at the Great British Baking Show.
And where does the Great British Baking Show fit into this?
That's just what gives me my power, my monster power.
Your Patronus is the Great British Baking Show.
It's just me. It's like Mothra flapping, and then like Rodan like screaming or whatever, and then it's just like me, and I'm just enraged at the bakers. But it's just as terrifying and awe-inspiring.
That is the...
It's just me like, if you think it needs to be proved more, put it back in the drawer!
Okay, so, kaiju and baking metaphor, I don't know. You've thrown me.
I have a lot of feelings all at once. I hope Tom Hiddleston listens to this podcast. And then it's just, instead of us being like, oh yes, Captain Conrad, yes, it's just me being like, nah, I'm just screaming at Netflix.
As previously mentioned, we did that previous podcast on the 33, 76, and 05 editions. Now we have the 17 edition. So of those 4 Kong films in a cage match, what's your favorite Kong?
Honestly, here's the problem, is I just rewatched the 05 Kong not that long ago, and I would say that's my favorite, but it does not hold up.
You don't think so?
the script is rough, dude. It's like, and I was watching it, and for some reason I have such like a special place in my heart for it, a special island with monsters on it, in my heart, that I couldn't not just adore it, even with all of the cringy lines, and I was so, I don't know. I think 05 might still be my favorite.
Can you throw out an example of a cringy line?
Honestly, I can't.
Okay.
Because I watched it recently enough to remember that those are my feelings, but not recently enough to name a line. Because
I rewatched it recently as well, and I still quite enjoy it. I think that in typical Peter Jackson fashion, it does go on a bit.
I love it. But a lot more than I realized before rewatching it. Because then I was watching it, and I realized whenever somebody said a line, I was like, oh my god, I remember how fantastic. But then in my head, I was like, this is a little iffy. But then I remember being sad because, well, and the other thing is, honestly, I fell asleep in the middle of it and slept until past the end. But then I woke up and I was like, I missed when he says it was Beauty killed the Beast. And like, what a bizarre role for Jack Black to play, you know? It's jarring to see Jack Black in a role where he doesn't basically just kick down a door and go, I'm Jack Black! Like,
yeah. I think he got that character of the kind of kitschy, over-the-top director.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You know, because I think one of the things that film did well was that in some ways it wasn't really trying to portray the 1930s super realistically. It was trying to portray the 1930s the way the 1930s portrayed itself in movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, it's got the like snappy dialogue of movies of the 30s and 40s.
Look here, see?
Where everyone's just kind of happy in a strange way, even though times are tough. And I think that he got how to play that. So you got the 1933. It started it all. It's a classic. It can't be removed from its iconic place. Then you have the wildly uneven 1976 version that most people try to forget, but has some good elements to it and is certainly better than King Kong Lives, that we didn't discuss at length because no one should ever have to see that film. Then Peter Jackson returns to the beginning. I love that take. Even with its excessive scenes, it's a more richly realized film than Kong Skull Island. But when Godzilla came out, they didn't necessarily know that this is going to work and we're going to make this shared kaiju universe.
Yeah.
And so as the Kong movie developed and they realized we really need to make this shared universe, like all the weight of creating the shared universe was dumped into Kong. And so some of it's a little forced, like it's trying a little bit too hard to say, hey, this is the same world. Kind of like Batman versus Superman had to try too hard to establish an entire DC movie universe
or
out of very little.
Was it
just to, you know, because they're like playing
Ultron,
catch up?
Yeah, or Age of Ultron. All the movies that take on too much and trying to make the universe seem big.
But of course, the strange thing in that respect with Kong is that it didn't really have a whole lot to take on, and yet still came out kind of thin.
You know, I would rewatch
but
it,
likable.
Though.
I would definitely rewatch it. I'd probably want to rewatch it before I see the other movies.
Yeah.
Or especially, you know, when we get to the next Kong movie. But as far as this current crop of, I mean, if you're just looking at Godzilla versus King Kong, as in the movie Godzilla versus the movie Kong Skull Island, to me, Godzilla is the better film.
Oh, definitely.
But you get more upfront giant monster action in Skull Island.
Yeah, and way more
if that's
cool
what you want,
too.
If that's what you want,
yeah,
you're going to get it from Kong. Because, yeah, those lizard death skull things.
The skull crawlers.
They were pretty cool.
They were pretty cool. I liked how they just had two legs.
Yeah.
So they were kind of creepy and like like weaving around.
And I liked how it's like they barely seemed to have eyes. They were just like these gaping.
It reminded me of
sockets.
orcas. No, because those were just markings. They had the white markings on their face, and then right behind the marking that looks like an eye, it had an actual eye.
Here's a question. Do you think we should have had at least one shot of the ants, or was it better that it was just a line of dialogue?
I think it was better with just a line of dialogue. It happened so... Honestly, that was the high point of the movie. It happened so quickly.
It was one of the scenes...
And it happened so... I mean, it just came out of nowhere, and it was, like, honestly the funniest line in the entire movie.
Yeah, and just another example of how the World War II, how John C. Reilly was allowed to steal the whole film. He was so likable and so funny, because the thing...
I can't even think about it.
Well,
I'll think about it, and then I just lose it.
What we didn't discuss earlier when we were discussing his character and how he got developed and the other ones didn't, was how he... over the 30 years, I mean to say, that he's been on the island, he's kind of gone around the bend a little bit. And I thought...
Am I talking out loud or am I thinking? I can't tell.
Yeah.
You can't tell? See, now, I'm talking, but your mouth is moving.
And I thought that Reilly really captured...
Yeah. Just being on the edge of, like, I've been here for a long time.
What he's been through is just astonishing, and it's perfectly natural that you would be a little,
But he still has a positive mindset.
Yeah.
A very strong person with a positive mindset, how they would be after that long. Yeah.
Yeah, and so to see him kind of rallying.
When he runs out and he's like, I put the old flight suit on for you.
Yeah.
Just dead, having a stroke in the middle of the theater.
Okay, final thoughts?
Lots of sunsets.
It was an entertaining film, served its purpose in the broader scope of things.
Lots of sunsets, and then me just clapping by myself whenever Tom Hiddleston or Kong is on screen. Kong kills the squid, starts eating it. Woo! Yeah!
Okay, this is a new segment, an addendum. First time we've ever done anything like this.
Yes.
So since we recorded the previous portion of the show, Ella has seen Kong 2 more times.
For a grand total of 3.
And I've seen it 1 more time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just wanted to reflect a little on thoughts that have come to us upon repeated viewings. Is there anything that you wanted to start out with?
Yeah. I do feel like we gave a fair review. The movie definitely has problems, and I think that we really, zeroed in on them. But, coming away from it, and now after seeing it 2 more times, I sort of started to feel like at least we were ragging on it a little bit. And I don't feel... It's like I saw it 3 times. I felt like the review that I gave wasn't for a movie that I would have seen 2 more times in the theater, and I might see it again.
I slightly disagree, because I completely get what you're saying, but sometimes, for various reasons, there can be a split between, on the one hand, recognizing problems, and on the other hand, just the enjoyment quality that the movie brings you. And so, like you said, I think we gave it a fair review, but it's still just such a fun movie for various reasons that even though... And in fact, one of the things I want to comment on is something that we both wondered about upon first viewing. We've now been able to look at much more closely. One of the weirdest glitches in the movie is the number of helicopters. Shall we talk about that? Because...
Okay, no, here's the thing, though, is that... Okay, I have to see it 2 more times to actually count every single one. The shots are so close. But you see it, and there's the first shot of the ship. There's 5 small helicopters, and then the one big, longer one. I don't know what that's called.
There's 4 or 5 Hueys, the classic Vietnam
there's
chopper.
Exactly 5. Yep, there's 5 of those.
And then there's one of the big 2-rotored choppers, which is a Chinook.
A Chinook. Now I have the vocab. So there's 6 total. But then, hold on, because then the back of because what we're seeing on the bow and in the middle. Okay, so there's those 6. So we have at least 6, including the Chinook.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the stern
Mm-hmm.
of the boat, there's another 2 or 3 little Huey helicopters. I'm certain of it.
I only thought there was
So,
one more there.
I don't know.
But even if we assume 2 or 3 more, that's still not as many as they show in the air.
Did you count all of them?
How
many do they actually show?
There were at least a dozen. I think as high as 15 choppers once they were in the air.
I don't know, dude.
But yeah, the cuts are very quick.
Because we only get one shot of all of the helicopters together, and it's like 1 second long, and then Samuel L. Jackson launches into that monologue that completely distracts me every time.
So once this is out on DVD and Blu-ray,
we're gonna pause it.
There's gonna be trouble, because then we're gonna get that exact
It's just
count.
like, every time I'm like, okay, I have to count them, and then I hear Samuel L. Jackson go, remember the story of Icarus, and I'm like, yes? Like, I just completely phase out.
I noticed upon second viewing a problem that I didn't notice the first time. They fly over the island, they run into Kong, hijinks ensue, crashing, screaming, killing, maiming, and then Tom Huddleston...
We call him that because I want to hug him.
They walk for miles through the jungle,
Mm-hmm.
and then they bump into Marlowe, the World War II pilot, and then he takes them, deeper into the secret village where all the
Iwis.
Is that what they're called?
Yep, they're called Iwis.
The Iwis, the villagers,
IWI,
the natives, where they live. And when they first meet Marlowe's like, excited and says something about, I couldn't believe it when they told me that you were coming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So then they get to the island, or the place in the river or whatever where the Iwis live. Iwis. And then at one point, what's her name? The anti-war photographer.
Mason.
So Mason hears a weird sound, and she goes outside of the giant wall, and there's one of the giant water buffaloes pinned under what seems to be one of their helicopters crashed right outside the village. And so then the spatial relationships...
So you're thinking that he should have been like, I saw the helicopter.
I saw one of your helicopters crash right...
But the other thing is that when I keep wanting to say Brie Larson because I didn't know her character's name for such a long time, but now I know that it's Mason Weaver. Mason Weaver walks outside the wall because she hears the noise, but none of the Iwis go outside. They're like, we're not going out there.
Okay.
So, maybe they were like, dude, like, they're coming. And Marlo was like, what? But they didn't really take, because it seems like they're very sketchy about leaving their village.
And then we would then just assume that everyone in that chopper died in the crash.
Yeah, or I kind of felt like they fell out.
And died.
Yeah, probably. Yep.
And so that would, that is a relatively believable explanation for a potential weird glitch in the storytelling there. It still seems like they must have been on the way to crashing for a very long time if they could crash outside that village.
Lots of the helicopters were like flipping around though, and like going maybe Kong could have thrown like a football.
I need a map. We need to get it on a map to figure out.
Here's one other thing that is bothering me, and maybe this is just like an army thing, but I don't understand. The helicopters crash in different spots, and they get on these radios and start talking about where they are. It's like, but I don't understand how they know where each other is, and especially that one guy, the Dear Billy guy, I don't remember his name. They have to go find him. Chapman. He's like way off in the middle of nowhere, and he's just like, well, I'm 4 clicks, whatever, and then Samuel L. Jackson is like, top of the highest mountain, I gotcha. And it's like, is it because you're in the army, you just know that you're 4 miles west and 1 mile east? I do not understand.
Yeah, they were a little breezy with some of the things there. Things just went by fast, and
I don't know. But I don't care.
But again, I was a little concerned seeing it the second time in pretty close proximity, that since there were some of these holes and weaknesses that we discussed earlier in the show, that they would stand out more to me. And a couple of them did stand out more, but they did not detract from my viewing pleasure at all.
Here's what we should also say. In the spirit of being truthful, we didn't actually pay to see it more times than just the one because my boyfriend won tickets on the radio. So
that was nice.
So I saw it another time with him, and then I saw it once again with you. I'm probably going to pay to see it.
I had a follow-up to something you mentioned earlier in the show, when something I was confused about on the skull crawlers. I was like, it's like they don't even have eyes. They just have these dark, like, sockets.
No, they're like orcas.
And you said, no, those are just markings. Yeah. There's eyes there.
Yeah.
Well, then I kept a close watch on the second viewing, and sure enough, there were eyes. So that was fun. One thing that needs to be emphasized, I think, upon reviewing that it's definite how much John C. Reilly as Marlowe just steals the entire movie.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
You mentioned Chapman, who played one of the more sympathetic and developed soldiers in the crew, because he's trying to write a letter home to his son, and then he eventually gets killed.
Well, he's writing the letter because he was supposed to be home 12 hours ago.
And then they went off on this other
Billy,
thing.
I'm in the army, and sometimes stuff happens.
So Toby Cabell is the name of the guy who played Chapman. And this is very interesting, particularly because there's that great scene between him and Kong that you mentioned earlier in the show, how he's washing off his blood, and then Kong comes in and is also like washing off his blood, and it's this interesting moment.
And he has a moment where he's like, oh, like Kong he's just doing the same thing I am. And there's like a moment where Kong even like looks at his hand and is like, and it's clear that his hand is all sliced up from grabbing the helicopter blades, and just like, oh.
Well, that guy, get this, did some of the motion capture performance for Kong.
That's so crazy.
But wait, there's more. The same guy also did the motion capture performance for Koba in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Koba, the evil Koba. Semi-evil.
Semi-evil. Still understandably
semi-rational, but also murdered a ape child. So
then I mentioned that Toby did some of the motion capture for Kong in Skull Island. The other guy who did some of the motion capture is named Terry Notary, and he played Rocket in all three of the Apes reboot movies. So we're yet to see him in the upcoming War for the Planet of the Apes.
Where do I get into the motion capture industry? Honestly, that seems like one of the most lit jobs in the film industry. Like, here, just put on this green suit and walk around like a freaking gorilla.
So cool. And it was practically invented by
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis, whose name I blanked on for a second there. I mean, because he kind of took it over.
Andy Serkis in Lord of the Rings playing Smeagol
and then
Gollum.
Yeah, and then playing Kong.
Kills me how he created this entire industry.
He practically did. I mean,
for a while it was all any motion capture, always Andy Serkis.
Yeah. Well, he had the luck of playing the first major character when the technology got to the point where it was really, believable. And
Smeagol looked really good for 2001, let's be real.
And so then so he was in the right place at the right time for that performance, and then just really took it over and opened the door, both his performance and the technology. They reached a point where it opened the door to, like, we can really do this on bigger scales and make amazing things like the reboot movies of the Apes.
And it's such an effective way of making CGI look so much more real. When you have those natural movements to place it on, it's so good. Anyways, we got distracted.
And the other thing, one other thing that I noticed upon the review that I missed in the first one, is that the same actor played young Marlowe in the World War II crash sequence. That played Marlowe's son at the end of the movie when Marlowe gets home and sees the son that he had never been able to see before, who was born after he went off to war. So that was really cool.
Cue me holding back tears in the theater 3 times in a row.
It's a marvelous scene. So there, we just quickly ran through a lot of the stuff that we really noticed upon repeated viewings. But was there anything? I mean, you've seen it one more time than I have. Was there anything that really grabbed you in those 3 viewings.
I'm just really impressed with the way that movie sort of washes over you. And you sort of have to see it, but it just happens, and the cinematography is gorgeous, the camera work is amazing, and it just, I don't know, I mean, looking past the character development problems,
Mm-hmm.
it's just every shot is so good, and almost every line is so good and perfect, and just I don't even know what to say about it, but and the first time we saw it, and part of the reason why I wanted to go back and do another segment about it is because we saw it the first time, and I was like, oh, that was fun. It was fun seeing Tom Hiddleston. It was so fun having another Kong movie. But then it literally, I'm going to be very dramatic about this, but it started just like encompassing my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just like, oh, well, that was a cool movie, like, whatever. But I kept thinking about it, and I kept thinking about it, and it was just like my brain was just like a sunset over Skull Island for like 3 days. And then I started listening to the soundtrack on Spotify every day on my way to class and back to my dorm, every day listening to The Passenger and CC Rider and Brother just like cruising down the street with like a bandana on my head, just like feeling it. I have one more thing I want to do.
Okay.
I want to do a very quick like highlights of Skull Island.
Okay.
Okay, so I want number 1, when Samuel L. Jackson goes, cold rolled Pennsylvania steel. That's one right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Number 2.
And no one could have delivered that like Samuel L. Jackson.
Nope.
You know.
Number 2, the stick plant that looks like more like a giant log, and the sound that it makes when Chapman shoots at it, and he's like, why would you do that to me? And then he like kind of walks away when what's his name yells, cut off its legs, cut it off at the legs, when there's that giant spider. Okay. When that same guy says that was an unconventional encounter. When at the beginning, when you think that the other soldier is talking about a girlfriend at home, but he's talking about his mom, and they make fun of him for having a bad mom. Oh God, I thought this was gonna be less than this.
You're just listing everything in the movie.
I know. I'm just gonna list everything out of order. Every single scene, every single time John C. Ryder opens his freaking mouth, okay? Every time he blinks.
Stole the movie. Yep.
Let's see. Ooh, at the end, after Mason almost drowns, and then she wakes up and just throws up on Captain Conrad. I don't know. That might be all the best of hits. Oh, when Randa is trying to use his camera in the Skullcrawler territory, and the flash breaks and just keeps going off, and he gets this look in his face like, oh no, because he knows that he's about to get eaten, and then he gets eaten. Ooh, when the Skullcrawler vomits up Chapman's skull and dog tags, and Captain Conrad is like, dude, we're all gonna die, and the kid we're trying to save is already dead. I don't know, I'm going downhill. The highlights are going downhill. They're not as highlighted. And I'm gonna buy it on DVD. Dear Billy, go see this movie.
Okay, we are going addendum crazy in this podcast. This is addendum part dos, because in the long wait that we've had while working on this, first we saw the movie again, and now, since recording that addendum, Ella has read the novelization.
Let's be real, I read it immediately after. I think I bought it, like, the second I knew that it was, like, out there. Like, I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought it because I had to have it.
And I haven't read it, so I'm just gonna listen to what you have to say.
Yeah.
We should. Well, is written by Tim Leben, who has also written some books in the Alien universe and other things. So, what did you think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, spoiler warning, obviously, because I'm not gonna hold back. I haven't held back this entire episode. I'm not going to start now. Basically, if you liked the movie enough to want more from it, you should read the book. I mean, like, I could have gone for so much more just like media about Skull Island. Like I'm just really into it. I still can't figure out quite why, other than it's just like awesome. But
so did he fill in some of the gaps of character development and stuff that we talked about that we thought was missing from the film?
Completely. Well, and one of my biggest problems was that they have Captain Conrad there, and he's just kind of like, yeah, I'm just like around, playing pool. But they talk so much about like his past and his time in the British special services. I don't know what it's called. And they really focus in on why he is so determined to get all of the civilians off the island alive, which obviously, I mean, obviously that's his job there, but I think when you're watching the movie, you can tell that he's sort of like fixated on that. And in the book, it's because his last mission when he was an actual captain was to like withdraw the daughter of like some, I don't know, high up British, whatever. She had been like captured. But she was like an illegitimate daughter, quote unquote. She was taken hostage, so they were in like the Middle East. And then while they're taking her out, they get her out and they're like, okay, the girl's safe. And then right when they think the mission's over and they're leaving, all of a sudden they're like under fire. And afterwards, Conrad realizes that the girl was shot in the head. And not only was she shot in the head, she was shot in the head with a sniper rifle. To him, it was like immediately obvious that somebody wanted her dead, like the 7-year-old girl, because she was an illegitimate daughter and all that stuff. And obviously it really upsets him. I thought all that was really interesting. It was really nice to get more of like an insight into his career and how he was like the best of the best, and then how he sort of like fell out of that career path. Yeah,
that's the kind of backstory that one would have really liked to have seen in the film.
Yeah, because then like later on in the book, he's like sort of he thinks about her. It's like this recurring thing where even before he went to Skull Island, he thought about her a lot. And so he's on Skull Island and he's still thinking about her. And it could have been really effective because it could have done the like war veteran PTSD, like flashback thing.
Yeah.
And it could have been like really effective, but they didn't.
Another thing that we really both missed in the film are there scenes back during the war with Marlowe and Gunpei after they're both on the island.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really clear if World War II is still like happening, obviously, because nobody else ever comes to the island. But yeah, there's more scenes. They tell you how Gunpei died, which I'm not gonna say because it's really, really emotional, and I think everyone should read the book and experience it for themselves. But
there you go.
It's really, really sad. They definitely talk about Marlowe and Gunpei's relationship more, and their relationship with the villagers. My friends, because I don't really have any real nerdy friends, they think it's weird to read the novelization. Like, it's always like, why? But you already saw the movie. But the thing about novelizations compared to movies is, well, for one, the author gets a little bit of wiggle room. But, like, number two, just the difference in the type of, like, media between books and movies and the way that it's the way that you experience it. Like, in books, you're seeing things from the characters' points of view.
Yep.
Like, and because you're in their head and you're like hearing their thoughts. And in movies, you just like see their reactions on the outside.
Yeah, it's a whole different experience.
So, yeah,
it can really
completely.
Yeah.
And so reading a novelization can make a movie like so much more deep, just because you know what each of the characters is thinking in every moment. And in the movie, I mean, especially in this movie, Conrad seems very like casual the whole time. Like, it's sort of intense, but he is definitely just focused, and he's a soldier and he knows what he's doing. But in the book, he's freaking out all the time because like their helicopters are knocked down by this giant ape. Like, it's nothing that he's ever seen before. He's not really trained for this. He's trained for, like jungle survival and whatever, but he's not trained to like save people from sea monsters and all this stuff. There's also, I swear they added a couple extra scenes and like tweaked a couple of the battles a little bit. Like there's a scene where they're on the boat where like something with tentacles grabs one of the soldiers and is like pulling him towards the edge, and then they're all like freaking out at the same time, and then ends up being like the female geologist who like all of a sudden has like Marlowe's Gunpei's sword and like chops it off.
Nice.
And yeah,
the thing that some people don't realize, like your friends who aren't as familiar with novelizations, is that the writer is often working from an early screenplay. There may be lots of changes made. There may be scenes added and cut to the script after the writer gets it. The writer is also given a certain amount of leeway to add stuff to the story as he or she sees fit, because a lot of movies, if you just told only the story that's in the script, it wouldn't be very long. And so they tend to flesh things out to make it a standard book length. And some of that just comes in the natural storytelling, as you were mentioning earlier, because they're adding all these internal thoughts that aren't in a film. But then sometimes they plug up little holes in the plot or little problems that they come across.
Yeah, they fix the plot holes that you hate. Yeah. And like, I mean, any scene could be completely different. Like, at the beginning when the soldiers first get to the coast or wherever I think they're still in Vietnam when they're about to leave for Skull Island, and they get there, and one of them is like, I should have been in Key West by now, man, not going to another island. And they have this thing where it's like, Vietnam's not an island, idiot. Like, and then he says like, Key West isn't an island either. It's a key. Like, and it's like this funny thing, and in the movie it's like really funny because they're just like sort of bantering, and then he's like, you're not funny, Cole. But in the book, that's only a passing line that Conrad catches while he's like on his way to the boat. And so to him it's just like two soldiers, like, and he's kind of like, okay, and it like, it's just like that entire thing is like almost cut out except for just those like two lines, and then you just keep following Conrad. Yeah. And I don't know. It was just really, really nice, and I read it a lot, like, while, like, walking to the bus, like, on my way to work and stuff, or, like, laying in the hammock in the backyard, and it has, like, the exact same feeling that the movie has. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just, like, I don't know. You're back on Skull Island.
I wonder if they, comparably to what they did, to what the author did with Conrad, if they fleshed out Mason, the photographer, her backstory, and also, two-part question. What about, now I've forgotten his name, the Samuel L. Jackson character? Did they make him any more believable or complex than just angry, shouting army guy? So...
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start with Weaver. All so, right. What's funny is there's a lot of, like, somebody will say something to her, and her reply is just, like, to take a picture of them. Like, she's very, like, I don't know, a lot of it is from Conrad's perspective, obviously, so it's a lot of how he is viewing her, and how he is seeing her interact with the world in a different way than everyone else because she's constantly behind her camera. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's some scenes with her where she's, like, sort of thinking, and she thinks about, like, some other, like, pictures she took in, Vietnam, but it's mainly centered around her photography. They really, that's mostly what they added, I feel like, in the book. Otherwise, she was pretty much the same, but they definitely made her more of, like, an artist.
And what about angry, shouting, crazy army guy?
He's still pretty much crazy. I mean, because he's angry. Like, he's such a complicated character because he's so, like, attached to the army, and so when the U.S., like, pulled out of Vietnam, and everyone's like, oh, we lost the war, and he's like, no, like, we didn't lose. So, I don't know. I mean, obviously, like, you hear his thoughts, and so, I mean, it seems a little bit more rational, but a little bit more rational, just because, like, you're seeing his emotions progress with every event. Yeah. Because it's like, oh, like, this end to, like, a war that he wanted to finish in what he felt was the right way, and then, oh, but we get to go on another mission, so I don't have to leave right away, and then that mission being crazy, and then his guys dying, like the soldiers under his command, and so I don't know. He's still
so overall, it seems obviously you quite enjoy the novel, and it's a really nice companion to the film because it fleshes out some of the thin spots in the movie, and yet captures the overall feel of the film.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there any other comments that you wanted to make about the book, other than people should read it if they love the movie?
People should read it if they love the movie. I don't know. There's a lot of really like subtle plot differences that I could talk about, but I'm not going to, just because I could talk forever. I would be more excited, but it's way too hot here right now, so I'm not as hyper as I was when we recorded the first couple parts of the episode. I just want to lie down. That's all the time we have for this episode. Tune in next time for episode 43, They Aren't What We Thought They Were, the first episode of our multi-part Alien retrospective, as we discuss the prequel films Prometheus and Alien Covenant.
Remember that Generations Geek is a part of the Chronic Rift Network, which broadcasts from space where no one can hear you scream. Please give their other fine podcasts a listen at chronicrift.com. Thanks for listening, and come back next time. No geeks were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Ooh, shiny.